Bonjour.
Hello, everybody. Very happy to welcome you on this controversy on the housing crisis. We'll talk about the difficulty of finding housing. We'll talk about poor housing, energy renovation, and see if the building of new housing is the solution to this housing crisis. Also, I'll introduce the ATIG, our two participants. You're the Director General of the French Banking Federation, bring together all the French banks, and you, Olivier, the General Director of the Caisse des Dépôts. Your nomination was approved in July, just now. And I'm Laurent MAURIAC. I'm the founder of a media called Brief Echo, aiming at having a pedagogical approach on the economic activity. So you're involved in the question of housing, the SBF, through the financing that your members, the bank, grant to enterprises and households and families to buy housing, either for rental purposes or to as an household, and the other you're a funder. So before we respond to the question if building is a solution, let's do a diagnosis of this crisis right now. What are the characteristics to highlight? I think that the crisis in the building of housing, well, housing has become too expensive. If you look at the last 40 years, the price of housing has been multiplied by 12 and income by 5. So you have a curve that's really, so housing has become too expensive. So the reason for this cost is multifactorial. There's the price of the real estate, that's half in the price of the housing, and real estate is rare, so it's scarce. The mayors have problems in delivering building permits, and regulations. European regulations have complicated things, and the costs have risen for the people who want to access property, and for investors who think it's too expensive with a view to the profitability or to the return on investment. It's a European crisis, and led the European Commission to have someone in charge of housing. So these are the roots of the crisis. So you're talking about accessing ownership, but in the rental market, there's also a problem of price, cost. What's a consequence that if you don't have enough housing that are built, so you have a phenomenon of raising costs. The costs rise. If you have new housing, well, the system is blocked. Maya ATIG, thank you for the invite to this discussion on a topic which is at the heart of the everyday life of the French people. If we use economic savings, there's an imbalance between an offer that is much lower than the demand, which has increased in a dynamic fashion. You also have the recomposition of the families, a change in the way of life of the households. We have students here, but even the students, I'm always very surprised to see students who live in a city except to do a special term elsewhere. And sometimes they need two housings, two apartments, and so there's very strong pressure on the offer. And the renovation also, which is not following. So there's also another cause. If we talk about the most recent phenomenon, is right after the COVID crisis, we have the higher costs in the construction materials, a lack of skilled workers, and the interest rates that rose drastically, and following the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and all this raise in the rates led to a discrepancy between the buying power for housing and the banks that I represent. We have a lot here at the Rencontre d'Aix. They say that we fight to lend money to our clients, so there's a will to lend money, but with corresponding rates, and these rates have increased much faster than the buying power of the clients. When you look at the housing park in France, there's something that seems contradictory. On the one hand, you have a difficulty to access property and find housing, but on the other hand, you have a lot of vacancies in housing. And the number at the beginning of 2024 is 3.1 million apartments that show vacancies. So it rose by I don't know 60%, I think. So is there a way to address this contradiction before anything? The problem is the location of these free housing. They're not necessarily where the people want to live. And there's this notion of stressed areas with unstressed areas. We have low-income housing offers in some rural areas. We work on the territories. You have empty housing apartments, but people don't want to live there because there's no work in the area, or we talk about students, there's no university offer. So the problem of stressed areas, those around the metropolis or the large urban areas, where the only solution there is to build because there's nothing vacant. Is there some houses, some apartments that could be out to rent, but where the owner, the landowner, for example, prefers to keep the apartments vacant? Well, if you go into the touristic areas, and that's an issue, you always find people who say the problem, it's seasonal rentals. Housing that's apartments that are purchased only to rent during the high season. Well, it's a share, not that large, but it's linked to places where there's a big stress. So on this market, there are other elements that explain the cost of housing depending on different places. If there's a very big stress, well, the prices are higher, but it's not necessarily due to seasonal rental. And there's the poor housing also issue. People who live in apartments that are hard to heat in the winter or to cool in the winter, in the summertime, like now. Is there a contradiction between renovating or building? Should we choose between both, or we're full low-income housing? It's clear, but the problem is being addressed. What you call those places that are hard to heat. It's less than 5% today, and things have been fixed. So for the low-income housing, a lot of investments were done on thermal renovation because the regulations imposed that. I think we're at the end of that, and in the figures I see for the beginning of the year, there's new constructions are planned. We should go beyond 100,000 low-income housing built, and French who live in poor housing conditions. The Fondation Abbé Pierre, for example, lists. Well, of course, we're talking about the poor populations. It'll be people who have access to low-income housing, and so we're building more. So there is a backlash. Obviously, the rates are high, but we have systems, which is the livret A, savings account, and the rate is very low, and it will still be lower because inflation is down. So we can lend at 2.4%, 2.4% rate. Very interesting. I think private client would be very happy to have that. So it's a rate that is for low-income housing operators, and I think that's a very good news. You have other systems that can be imagined to facilitate access. As the financier of 1.3 billion euros of that's the level private investments. It covers also some of the public housing. Yes, with the Caisse des Dépôts, it's 1.3 billion euros. No, 1,300 billion euros, and this covers 30% of the households, and those who have recently accessed. A lot have used this credit, and so we try to cover how we can imagine residential paths. We see that the person who is very poorly housed, they will try to access low-income housing, and then move to eventually access to property and so on and so forth. But it's very important to see the different elements of the chain. So we made propositions so that today's system to access housing be better calibrated, I think, on the territory. There's a problem with zoning, the different zones which are not well managed, and we don't necessarily, sometimes we will consider as stress a zone which is no longer, or it's no longer the case. So we have, for the zero rate loans, we made a lot of propositions on the articulation between the zero PTZ loan, which is linked to renovation. And we also made propositions with other specialists in housing on the status of private donor and the status of private landlord. Well, the idea is they want to know, they wait because they wait for the new announcements from the next minister, for example, with lower interest rates or better options. So the private renter or landlord, the idea is to have a more stable system, stability of the subsidies, of the type of tax incentive that you have, or construction standards and regulations. That's really is key. What we see in banks today is that the people who hesitate to start renovating their housing, so those people hesitate because they figure, is this the right material I should use? Is it the right renovation I'm considering? So stability is really the key word, so that all these people can have access to quality housing. You talk about the residential path. First of all, I rent, then I access, then I buy my own housing. So isn't there a phenomenon of people who continue to rent for a longer period, and this eventually, since they don't move to accessing property, isn't there a phenomenon of a sort of like a jam, a traffic jam, a bottleneck, because they don't release the apartments for other people? Yes, it's a good diagnosis. It's a bottleneck. So 2.7 million French people have filed to have access to public housing. 100,000 apartments were built, but at that rate, it would take 27 years to fix the problem. But the apartments are not released. The people stay in the apartments. So we have a turnover rate with public housing, especially the people don't have access to other housing. They stay. They don't have access to private properties because it's too expensive. So we're stuck in this system, which explains that once the diagnosis was made, is building the only solution to the housing crisis? Well, we say yes. Yes, we need to build more to satisfy this very strong demand. So we're saying 100,000 public housing built, or low-income housing. Well, compared to the previous years, it's a drop.
So this will be a projection of 20% up on last year. So the Caisse de Dépôts is doing more and more. So 10 years ago, we were building 1 in 5 housing units. Now it's 2 units, 2 in 5. When I go around now these days, I can see the cranes, and I count out these cranes, and I think two out of the 5 of these cranes are ours that we're funding. So we're 2 out of 5 in terms of funding, and what we need to do more, and this is our role in terms of social cohesion. We work in intermediary housing, and we're going to add 30,000 intermediate housing, and we've got 100,000 in other housing units, so 130. We announced last week some student housing. There's a lot of demand for this. We are going to do 75,000 student housing units over the next 5 years with another developer. So 75,000 is going to be 50,000 social student housing. And then we're going to have space as well for the elderly in retirement homes. We are an aging society, and that means that older people are becoming dependent and they can no longer stay in their housing, and that's something that also needs to be funded because there's a demographic transition as well. Do we need to go beyond that? Does the Caisse des Dépôts need to start funding or financing 3 or 4 out of 5? I'm not sure we really want to go there. That's not where we want to go. So if I understand correctly, for you, Olivier, SICHEL, the solution is construction, and for you, Mayor ATIG, the solution is not just construction, but there are issues associated with the fluidification of the market. I'm trying to create the controversy here. Yes, I think there are a number of subjects of debate issues in this area of housing, but I think between us, actually, there's not very much in terms of disagreement, because today we have a lot of people who understand the housing sector, and we understand that we can't just keep passing responsibility to someone else. We're all too weak to be able to have to just work on our own and accuse others. So what's really important is that we work with a whole number of different levers. Construction is good, it's important, but we can see with what's going on around the world, this can affect all kinds of things. We need to really streamline the market. We've got a whole number of people that can do this, and this is something we want to do very much with other people. And then renovation is a subject that Olivier SICHEL has worked a lot on personally. This means working with a number of different technical professions. We were talking about students. We were talking this morning about we've got an architecture student whose father doesn't want to build anymore. So this is an architect here who's thinking about reuse. So we've got a whole number of different levers, but construction is 291,000, and this is 25% less than just a few years ago, and this is a real collapse. So what we can't change society. We can't tell people to stop separating, and in couples to stop separating. We can't tell people to stop aging. So we really need to use all opportunities to provide a solution. The final issue I wanted to raise with you was about distance from a place of work. Policemen, nurses, teachers who work in the center of Paris, for example, where rents are really just extravagant. What solution can we put in place for them so that they don't have transport times of an hour over to come to work? Well, these are issues that we're working on, that we really want to work on. We're working with big employers, the PHP in Paris, and also with the national police force outside cities, also with the post office and EDF, in order to find suitable solutions. We're really seeing progress. We're starting to put in place systems between social housing and intermediate housing, where we break up property and we own the land and they own the structure, for example. But what we can see is that there's been something that's been amazing. There's been a real opportunity that's offered, not for policemen or for nurses, but for a number of tertiary workers who have this opportunity to work remotely and to go to cities and to do remote working. So we've worked hard to make sure that there is an ultra-fast, there's a high-speed internet network all around the country. We don't talk about that anymore, but that's really made a real difference in terms of everything that's happened in terms of COVID and the development of medium-sized cities. There are people that are saying, well, if I'm being asked to go to Paris just a couple of days a week, I could go and live somewhere else, where I might find a market that's more relaxed, that's more accessible, where there's green areas, where there's cities with an interesting historical heritage, and there's a way of getting out of Paris and metropolitan areas. This is an opportunity for some kinds of jobs, but of course it's not for professions that need physical presence. Yes, of course, I was thinking of those professions that need physical presence. Do you have any ideas about reforms that might make it possible not to resolve the housing crisis, but to somehow reduce it. Thank you. Well, I want to talk about what might seem a very technical aspect, which could have a really direct impact. In France, we have fixed rate loans, primarily fixed rate loans. That's not the case somewhere else. The market has organized it, set itself up that way. It's a system that is really very favorable to borrowers. And since there's a strong competition between the banks, this pulls down rates. So fixed rate mortgages that are low, and so when the overall rate went up to 4%, the banking rates just went up to 2.5%. So in terms of for buying power, that was a lot in terms of consumers, but in terms of what other countries are experiencing, it was a lot less. It went up much less, and monthly payments stayed fixed. So in France, when you borrow for maybe 30 to 35 years. At the end of your life as a borrower, you pay the same amount in euros and centimes. And so this is a system that is really not known in very much in other European countries. And it means that today there is going to be a European Commissioner for Housing, but our concern at a banking level is that a European banking supervision might not take into account the national specifics of the national market here, and it might encourage the French market to no longer be on a low fixed rate. We can see, and you as customers don't know this, and that's a good thing, but there are increasing number of restrictions within banks in terms of loan management because they are seen as too favorable to borrowers who are not taking the risk of variable rates. So we have some signals in terms of social housing where there's been some recent improvement, but we've really had to fight to show how social housing works in France. So these are technical aspects. So it's really very important to have a European Commissioner who respects the specificities of different countries and that doesn't create other constraints on top of the other situation we're facing. How about you, Olivier? Well, of course, we're talking about, in terms of building, constructing, how are we going to find land to build on? So here's some good news for you. Last week, I was in Grande-Sainte. This is in the suburbs of Dunkirk. This was last Friday. There's a nice breeze, a cool breeze. We went in the north of France. It was really cool. It was amazing. And just thinking about that, I just feel really nostalgic. But in Grande-Sainte, there's a big shopping area. We're in the north of France, in this world where ocean dominates. So sometimes these are called a bit ugly, these shopping centers with Leroy Merlin and others. And this is a shopping center that's not performing well. And the idea, together with the Auchan Group, who owns the land, the idea is to rebuild the city without developing this artificial land, without laying more concrete, because they're seeing that they don't need any more of these huge car parks, etc. And so Dunkirk is developing with the development of the port, and so there's not much land left, but we can reinvent the city, and we're doing that with a number of different partners, thinking about how we can transform the city, thinking about how to recreate housing and get rid of that ugly side of France. So that would be a really good thing. So here you're thinking about building, but not in virgin territory, but in areas where there is already buildings, as it were. Well, thank you very much. Thank you to both of you. Thank you.